Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. So, I feel like I say this on all of my videos, but I'm very excited to do this video today. And that's because we're going to be reviewing When the Night Bells Ring by Jo Kaplan. Now, the reason I'm so excited to do this review is because this is the second book that was featured in the Twisted Retreat box. For those of you guys who do not know, Twisted Retreat is a new horror book subscription box curated and fully run by the crew over at Unplugged Book Box. I was very, very excited when they first started teasing that they were doing a horror box, and then they announced it. It debuted in October, so this is the November book. I was not at all thrilled with the October book, didn't like it at all. I've spoken about it a couple times on my channel. But when I got this book, I was really, really intrigued by the premise, especially because I wasn't sure if it was going to be about like mole people or vampires. We're going to talk about that. And I read it, and it worked for me way more than A River of Ashes did. So yes, this is When the Night Bells Ring by Jo Kaplan. Again, this is the Twisted Retreat special edition. It is a truly gorgeous, gorgeous book, as all of the Twisted Retreat books have been thus far. I mean, this cover is stunning. Stunning, 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 stunning. And this cover is what really made me think that it was going to be vampires. We have like this coffin and the bats. I will say bats play a very pivotal role in this book. Coffins, not so much. So let me read the inside flap for y'all. So it says, "It's 1869 and something is killing people in Virgil, Nevada. Lavinia Kane must unravel the town's mysterious curse to save her family from the strange creatures that roam the night. When 150 years later, her diary is found in an abandoned silver mine, two climate refugees unwittingly wake the horrors that still haunt the deserted town." So simple premise. When I first read it, it reminded me, I think, a lot of like The Descent. And I will say reading the book definitely reminded me quite a lot of the movie The Descent. If you've never seen that movie, it's one of the scariest movies ever, in my personal opinion, because it just perfectly simulates dread and claustrophobia. It's so good. But I was very, very intrigued to read this book because of that. So the book is told from two different perspectives. We have our main character, Lavinia, who was alive, I think it's in 1863, during like the end of the gold rush. And so you get this kind of like very like Victorian, Wild West kind of like saloon, brothel, like poor families trying to make a living kind of situation. I really loved that entire plot of the story. It was the central plot of the story. However, so it's told kind of it's told kind of alongside of what I would call a frame story. It's more of like an interwoven frame story. We are watching the perspective of a woman 150 years later who has found Lavinia's diary and is reading it. And I kind of felt the frame story didn't necessarily need to be there. The frame story had a lot of like climate change activism kind of shoved down your throat, which I don't necessarily disagree with, but it felt very forced compared to the rest of the story. And this has been something that I've seen a lot recently, and I've talked about several times on my channel last year, primarily with Clown in a Cornfield 2, is I don't love when an author puts their political views into a novel so blatantly. I have no issues with authors putting their political views in books, but when it feels like it's just added on there to be like, this is what I believe, it takes me out of the narrative. I feel like I'm watching the news all over again, you know, or reading like an aggravated Reddit post, you know? And so it felt very, very forced. It wasn't very subtle. It was very much like climate change is happening and the world is going to be destroyed and this is why it's happening and you are the cause. And it just felt very unnecessary to the storyline that was happening, you know, because I feel like the situation that put our two main characters, I feel like the circumstances that put our two main characters in the situation where they end up in this cave to find this diary, it did not need to focus on climate change. So it added just so many extra pages and background to the novel that I don't think was needed to tell the story. and it kind of took away from the core message of the book, which I thought was actually very, very strong. And I thought that worked in a much more subtle and impactful way. A large, large, large portion of this book is pretty much critiquing the way that land has been taken away from Native Americans throughout history, and the way that people come in and just kind of push out the Native peoples. And that is not only addressed towards the Native Americans, which is slightly obvious in the book, because obviously 1860s frontier and like the disputes that they have with the Native American tribes, that is spoken about. That is really kind of, it's only really one chapter that really focuses on it, but at first I thought it felt a little misplaced, but then reading the book as a whole, I really saw how it was just kind of solidifying the metaphor. But that metaphor then carries over to our cave creatures, and they also become an extended metaphor for the beings that were in a place before these American colonists took over. And it's kind of echoed in like the climate change narrative as well. I'm assuming one of our main characters, Waynoka, I hope that's how you say it, is of Native American descent. She was from South Dakota. I don't know if Waynoka is a Native name. Yes, Waynoka is a Cherokee word for sweet water. So yes, that is a Native American name. A very cool name. I really, really liked it. So I thought it was really interesting, just all of like the subtle hints about that. And again, with the climate change story, we do get another example of a Native American who has been displaced from the place that she feels she belongs. So definitely there, but I felt that the climate change metaphor really took away from, well, it wasn't even a metaphor. The climate change story is just climate change, right? But it really took away from the extravagant and very tastefully done metaphor of the displacement of Native American people by the American pioneers. I thought that was so well done, and it translated so beautifully into the entirety of the monsters in the caves. They were so freaking cool. So I don't really want to spoil too much about it. I think this is a really interesting and bleak story. Definitely a slow burn. I thought the monsters were awesome. I love that they aren't necessarily vampires, and they aren't necessarily like the mole cave people that we see. They're very unique. They reminded me a lot of porcupines in their description. I know that sounds weird, but that's kind of how I saw them in my head. But they're much creepier. I loved their hibernation phases. I loved their hunting phases. I thought they were so cool, and I loved how subtle it was to introduce them. Absolutely adored that. I thought it was very well done, a very unique monster, very unique circumstances for the monster. I loved how we do get a lot of answers about their origins and where they're from. You're not just left in the dark, pardon the pun, on everything. And while I wasn't a big fan of the overarching frame story, I did thoroughly enjoy reading about Mads and Waynoka being trapped in the cave. There was a slight plot hole there because one of the characters very early on gets injured in a way. They get injured in a way that I feel like would debilitate them, so that there are parts of the story where I don't think they would have been able to navigate the cave the way they did, but that's just me. But for the most part, I thought the cave was super creepy and dark. I loved like the mysteriousness of like the caverns and the bats, and the way that they integrated it into Lavinia's story, along with the origins of the creatures. I thought it was very well done. It had a lot of unnecessary fluff to it, I will say. I feel like we definitely spent way too much time in the cave on scenes that didn't matter. There's an entire scene about like a secret cavern that just goes nowhere. And that was, I think, one of the issues I did have with this book, is that I felt that Jo Kaplan was working really hard to give Mads and Waynoka's story more depth than it needed. I think, again, it would have been so much stronger if it had been really just trimmed down and more effective. And that was actually what kind of slowed reading for me. I really got excited to read about Lavinia's chapters, and a little like annoyed when I got back to like a Waynoka or Mads chapter, because it never really went anywhere. It was just like, we're still stuck in the cave, here's some more backstory on us that isn't gonna matter kind of thing. Just overly detailed. But all in all, I thought it was pretty fantastic. I liked Wainoka as kind of this neutral character. She does have her foil in Mads. But what I found the most interesting was Lavinia's story, because Wainoka feels such a connection to Lavinia, and yet when you actually look at who Lavinia is, she's really not a good person. And I thought it was great to have a main character and see her perspective where she thinks she's in the right the whole time, and you can quite clearly see you're not a great person, you know? She's not married to the greatest guy, and she kind of turns a blind eye to the negative things that he does. She's pretty much a terrible mother to one of her children. She's got a lot of favoritism. She's very judgmental. You know, she might have a drinking problem. You know, there's a lot of things that, like, just from her diary, like, she's made out to be, like, this great person from her own perspective. But you can see that she's a very flawed individual, and I really loved the depth of her as a character, because I don't believe that Lavinia is a good person, but I don't believe that the things that happened to her were justified. And I thought it was a very effective way to tell her story through these diary entries. And I thought it was very interesting how much Wainoka resonated with her, because Wainoka seems to be a very good character and Lavinia a very flawed character. And I just really loved that dynamic. So I was really, really pumped on this story. I hope I didn't give too much away. I tried really hard not to talk about the plot at all. But if you were into a kind of slow burn, claustrophobic 1860s creature feature, this is a really good one. I really enjoyed it. This was 4 stars for me. Again, I just felt like some of the unnecessary details could have been trimmed, but I do really enjoy this. I thought it was very fun. I'm very stoked that Twisted Retreat included this, and this was definitely a win for me. Very excited to see their January book, because I'm pretty pumped on the premise of that. So hoping that one clicks with me as well. But yeah, so if you didn't enjoy the first Twisted Retreat book, hopefully you will enjoy the second one, because I know I thoroughly did. And it was just very unique and original, and I'm very stoked on that. Anyways, that is all that I have for you guys today. As always, I post every Monday and Thursday, sometimes on Saturdays, and if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe buttons down below, and I will catch you all in the next one. Mwah!